Good morning.
Good morning.
I look forward to introducing the class to somebody that you already know real well, much more than you know me even, Professor Lauren Hess, who has gotten her undergraduate degree from Cal Lutheran and her master's degree from John F. Kennedy University. And if you would join me for the rest of the summer in supporting Professor Hess in prayer as she undergoes examination for her recertification, a really important part of professional development. Thank you for your time today. I look forward to hearing from you about ethical dilemmas, maybe even legal issues that you've confronted in your many years of practice. I remember as we talked, one of the things that you brought up was about parents that are perhaps over involved
hmm
or like helicopter parents,
Yeah.
and how you navigate that, just the issue of their hovering, but also bringing in that idea of confidentiality.
hmm So it probably depends on the setting. And a lot of the students know that I also coach. So sometimes I have the coach hat, like a soccer coach, or a consultant hat. So I notice with the many years of working with parents that some can be a little bit intense. And it really depends on the age because sometimes as they get older, you hear kids like slash back at parents with their mouth and tell them stuff, or you can visually see like the trauma that it's causing their kid when they're competing. So I think at least from maybe if it's like a team perspective and you see a parent on the sideline, helping coaches navigate boundaries and setting up expectations, like the earlier you can do that, the better. I always have like a 10-yard rule. Like some parents abide by it, some do not. It just depends on the team culture. But reminding them to kind of keep their distance is important. But when working with one-on-ones, I think it's important to discuss it in the very beginning and to set up that boundary, especially when you're working with a kid and both have signed the consent form, parent and kid, assuming that it's a minor, and then making it very clear up front that you're here to help their child and that what's said is confidential, and setting those boundaries earlier, it makes it a little bit less personal and easier to reassert that later on if it comes up. And we had talked about it in class this last week, but knowing when to also walk away or refer out, because sometimes you can't help a kid if the parent isn't willing to do work too.
You mean if the parent isn't willing to keep the 10-yard rule, or
Yeah.
they're not willing to look at your feedback about how that's impacting their child?
Yeah, sometimes other parents will intervene. Like if I'm in a coaching standpoint, I've had a parent like come at me during a game, and I've had other parents like intervene to try to de-escalate. Usually like your body language is really important to de-escalate. So like standing at it like a triangle, like looking up. So it automatically having that open body language helps somebody kind of calm down a little bit without you really having to do
As
a whole
opposed
lot.
to this.
Yeah, exactly. So that definitely helps. Having a calm voice, like taking a few deep breaths before you say something, because it can be very triggering or intense, especially if somebody's heated. Having a 24-hour rule can be important to not discuss things until people have calmed down a little bit. But with
Did you have that, or you encourage the parent and the athlete? What?
it depends on if it's a coach and an athlete, 24-hour rule. If it's a coach and a parent, 24-hour rule. If it's like somebody with me, it's like a 24-hour rule, because I think it kind of lets someone settle down their feelings and have a little bit of more normal response, or setting up a session like outside. Sometimes you don't have that luxury, like a parent just goes off and wants to come at you. So figuring out how you want to handle that, or someone makes an inappropriate comment to you or belittles you, like how do you handle that situation in a professional setting? It's hard.
No kidding. Do you have one of those examples that met your standard of being successful? How you handled it?
Well, I think I handled the situation. The students know, in the fall, I had a parent come at me and call me a little girl and say like very aggressive stuff about her daughter. And I was focused on coaching, and these kids were only 11. And so for me, it was like focusing on where the parent was so I didn't get hit in the back of the head or something, but also trying to be respectful because the girls are watching. So like if I were to yell at her, then it just escalates it more. And some of the parents intervened and like took her away. But for me, I think it was taking a few deep breaths and talking, like being assertive and consistent with the boundary. Like now is not appropriate time to talk. We can talk at a later time when it's calmed down, and just reaffirming that. And if they don't want to respect that, that's really their issue. You can only control so much of that. And having like a backup plan. So that was something we addressed after the situation didn't really de-escalate, and it was more about her personal life with her husband than it was about me. So I think knowing that sometimes when someone's upset, it's not always directed at you.
Yeah.
But it can feel like that. And it was very personal, and it did shake me up a little bit.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
You had also mentioned the difficulty when a parent wants to know about things that you're talking about that you might really consider confidential, and how you navigate that.
It's hard. I think, especially assuming that we establish the boundary of like them not being in the session, unless the kid is okay with it, or if it is in a situation where it's beneficial to have the helicopter parent in the session to help the child, if they're a little bit older, to be a little bit more assertive and express to their parent like what they need from them. Especially if you think about it with sports, like the car ride home, a lot of times kids will just get reamed. Parents are just like, or like off the field. I had a situation where I was walking behind one of my players, and their mom was just ripping her like, you suck, you played awful. And I'm standing there behind her, and this poor kid is 11. And I was just like, please don't turn around, because it would have escalated it and made it worse for the kid. It would have been humiliating. But a lot of kids do have those types of pressures, especially in like Southern California with youth sports and like the levels and like getting scholarships. So I think it's important to have that dialogue if you have the right relationship with the person and they're open to it. Because you don't want to also put someone on edge and be confrontational, where it's like your energy is awful, like you're doing this to your kid. In the end of the day, like everybody wants to help their kid and they want their kid to do well. So coming from that place is a little bit different than coming at someone and being like, your actions are awful.
Yeah.
So I sometimes actually there's like two ends to this. I feel like sometimes, especially if the parent's paying for it, they'll give you a lot of dialogue about what's going on with their kid or stuff that has come up. I've had an athlete where her parent told me that she acted very emotional and was very upset at her banquet. And so this was information that I had going into a session, and it's kind of confidential because you don't want to tell the kid that you know like what they did and break that trust. So learning how to also take information that you receive from parents or coaches and find a way to get it out of the athlete from them, instead of making it sound like you're asking all these people about their life and all this, because that can impact like trust and rapport. But at the other end, like you have coaches, you have parents, you have athletic trainers, you have all these people, especially at college levels, that want to know everything about what's going on. So either telling them like, hey, it's doing really well, like we've had a couple of great sessions, because they know. It depends if you're a coach, like you can get away with saying a little bit more because you have to, especially if I've had athletes that have had concussions. So like we do have to share information between athletic trainers and myself. and coaches to make sure that they're not having backward steps with their recovery and that they're being transparent, because a lot of athletes will lie and say like, oh, I'm fine, and they're not. So navigating that relationship dynamic where you're sharing, but you are all covered.
Right.
And then the other one would be like parents always want to know, coaches, like a club coach would want to know. Being vague and giving enough without giving specific details can help. But also what you could do is, what a lot of times I'll do is I'll tell the athlete, like, this is in your power. You can share what you want to and what you don't. You don't have to if you don't feel comfortable.
That's a beautiful answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Depending, of course, on the relationship with the parent.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a wonderful answer, to keep working to empower the athlete.
Yeah. Because even little kids, they know what's going on. Like I've seen it in the 11-year-old girls I was coaching. Like they know and they could vocalize enough. But I also have had situations where they're like, don't tell my parent that my teammate is bullying me. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, that's kind of a weird situation. But it's one of those where it's your two players. So you have to figure out how to navigate that relationship dynamic too, because confrontation does come up on teams and individuals. And it kind of takes me back to elementary school where we had like a box where we had to face each other and kind of talk it out. So I have a personal rule where I don't let my players leave if there's confrontation. Like I have to discuss and like come to terms of either when they're going to meet and talk about it in private, or discuss why they feel the way that they feel so that nobody goes home angry, because then it just festers.
My thought is it's complicated, but probably helpful to you to have been a coach as well as a counselor,
Yeah.
as well as a player when you were in elementary school, so that you really understand the dynamics and dimensions.
Yeah. I was very fortunate that I swam and I played soccer through college. So I have both elements of like a team sport and like an individual sport.
Yeah.
So I can understand the culture a little bit better of like competition within teammates. But I think also just having that athletic background and coaching has really helped a lot of just understanding team dynamics and coach perspective. Because as an athlete, you think like coach is making dumb decisions, like coach doesn't know what they're doing, like why are they doing this? Why am I not playing? And then when you are the coach, you realize all the different things that come into play.
Well, Professor Hess, I could talk to you all morning, but I promised you I wouldn't do that. Is there one final thought about this whole area of ethics and legal implications that you might leave with our students?
I think I would say to trust your instincts. If you feel like if you're hesitating on any kind of a situation and wavering, then it's probably something that you need to take some time to consider before you respond or react or reach out to a mentor in those situations. Sometimes things come up, especially with how fluid and like in the team we are and how we're so crucial and we're on the sidelines. We can be traveling, we can be on the bus, like we can have athletes call us. I think the one thing is like have a strong plan and boundaries. So for me, I don't usually take calls or text messages past a certain time at night. But I have had rare situations where it's an athlete that I have been worried about that has reached out and is emotional, and I'm worried something's going to happen. So I have done that. I've broken that rule for certain situations. So like understanding where your boundaries are,
right,
and having like that support. Because if I needed to refer out, I knew who I would go to. If I needed to bring in coach, I knew who I could go to. It's like knowing like your role with your team, and as well as your own personal boundaries.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for everything that you've had to say today to keep educating our students so they can become more mature and confident and competent in this field.
Of course.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, of course.